All right, I'm here with Calum Raistrick and Niall Darwen after just winning the Toronto Pro. How you feeling, man? How you guys doing?
Good, bro. Good. It was crazy experience. But yeah, back home now. Olympia qualified. Thanks to Cal.
It was your work.
How do you feel, Cal?
Yeah, accomplished. It was nice to see that was planned for a long time, so it was nice to see
Yeah.
one and done. It is always a good feeling when it's been in the pipeline for that long.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how long I've known you for, Niall,
Yeah,
now,
man.
but like,
Yes.
I'm fucking. I was hyped to see it. I'm excited. It's awesome. You're like the first one of us like around our age to like
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
get this shit done. So it's fucking awesome to see it actually come to life now.
Mhm.
You're there. It probably feels surreal.
Yeah, it definitely is like you said, out of like all the group of us that are around that age. And it's like I honestly didn't expect it. I knew I looked good, I knew it was my best ever, but I think I don't think you can go into a show, especially at that level with the kind of competitors that are in it. I mean, there's like what how, was it like three other Olympians in the show, I think, that I was up against. So it's not like I was assuming I was going to lose, but you can't like ever count those guys out.
Yeah, yeah. So were you nervous going into the show? Did you feel confident? How were you feeling?
Do you know what? It was actually probably mentally the best I felt. I was just very chill. I wasn't like confident as in like like Phil Heath type shit where he's like I'm going to walk in and kill everyone. But I knew that like me and Khaled, like we had something good. But it was the first time where like I wasn't nervous. I said to him like, usually before every show, I like have to spend a lot of time calming myself down, especially like the last couple days and the day of the show. But like I was waiting to get the nervous feeling and I never got it. So yeah, it was just different this time.
That's great. You were just prepared.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, yeah, it's like what
Prepared.
Carl said. He was like, it's because you know you've prepared correctly,
Mm.
so that's why there's no nerves.
Yeah. Now, Cal, how long have you been coaching? For anybody watching, just I guess like a quick background on
Yeah.
you. Obviously, you are the head of Team Pro Coach, right?
Yeah. So I've been coaching just over 10 years, but the brand that we run now, it used to be called the Muscle Mentors, and then I branched off into what is now Pro Coach, and we used to do a lot of education for coaches and personal trainers, and then I kind of prep coached on the side, and then about 2 years ago we went fully in on the prep coaching side. So that was the birth of Pro Coach in 2020, end of 2021.
Okay. And when did you and Niall officially link up together?
It was about a month after your couple of months after the Arnold 2022, right?
Yeah, it's 4 weeks after the Arnold. Yeah,
Yeah.
After you got your pro card.
yeah. So got my pro card and then did the Arnold, and then the guy who I was working with, not Phil, it was just temporary for a few weeks. I was looking just to work with someone else because he was kind of going out of the direction of bodybuilding. He's coaching in different sports, and like I said this to Cal actually the other day, seeing him at the Arnold with his athletes, and just how he was handling them and just like the team kind of structure that he had. And then also one of the guys walked in, so it was his pro debut as well, and the athletes check-in. And for me, going every other show I'd done, like conditioning was something that I struggled with and I knew it. And one of his guys walked in and the death face that he fucking had. I saw it straight away and I was like, right, I need to work with Carl. Because yeah, I was like, he's achieved that extreme level of conditioning. And to be fair, he took fourth as well. So it's a pro debut, Arnold Classic, and he's taken fourth. So like it backs up, the look and the results. And then yeah, I just sent Cal a message about 4 weeks later because I just had a little bit of time off to like think and recover. And then yeah, I reached out to him, and then from there we're working together like 18, 19 months now since then.
Yeah.
Okay. So, tell me what really, if anything, what were the main things that really changed from when you guys started working together from what you were previously doing? Whether it's like diet training, were there things that were just drastically different?
Um, the training was definitely different. I mean, with Phil, we had kind of a bit more of a higher volume approach, and I guess more like old school methods. We used a lot of supersets, a lot of like giant sets and things like that, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. And Phil did improve my physique significantly to get me to a pro card level. And then obviously, it was just developing a high pro level physique with Callum. But yeah, his training methods, the nutrition, and just like his level of knowledge, like every kind of issue that I have, whether it was like an illness or an injury or anything like that, even just like when I kind of expressed to him sort of my mental like struggles within a prep, he had an answer or a solution for all those things. So it's that kind of trust. And then again, like I said, the results are backed up with it. Like there's nothing where I came to him and it was kind of just like he was like, I don't know, which again, I don't expect anyone to know absolutely everything. There's bodybuilding is very complicated, a very individual like journey, but in my experience, like with him, and as well, we've worked together longer and longer, and he's learned more about me as a person and my physique. It just works so well that I like all the methods and everything. I have complete trust in, and that's probably why my results have been significant because I apply everything that he does to the best of my ability.
Okay. Now, from I guess your input as a coach, right? A huge thing. Obviously, we know Niall made crazy improvements over the past off season, like fucking insane. But also, he was very lean. He had like his glutes were in the entire off season, as far as I'm aware. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not far off.
Is there is there something is there some key to that? And I see this with I don't think not with like all IFBB pros, but just a lot of these bigger guys that are more experienced. They tend to stay a lot leaner year round and just look like they're between 10 to 12 weeks out on average. But even him like having shredded glutes, not shredded, but his glutes were in year round. What aspect is really contributing to that?
I think so. There's two sides there for Niall going into that off season. He's still a weight cap restricted athlete, so he's only got a certain amount of distance he can cover before he gets out of a comfortable realm from the weight cap that I know is going to be a lot to take off in one prep. But also, I think from the get go, we'd always said from the start that that first prep for him, regardless of the intended outcome, was to just see him at 100% from a conditioning perspective and detail perspective on stage. Because I remember seeing him as an amateur competing the year that you turned pro, and I remember Loki showing me when you competed on the British stage in the regional before that, and I was like, this guy has the craziest structure I've ever seen, but he's just not fully dialed in when I see him, and it's just what ifs. So I think for us the biggest thing was the setting up the best prep possible to make sure that became a reality. And you see that a lot with seasoned guys and a lot of those guys will have, whether classic physique or 212, where they know they've got to stay in proximity to where they need to be on stage. And it also means that there's less to take off in prep. And it means that you can dial in that final level of conditioning much more accurately each time. And the exciting thing for him is now, like, if you imagine, if we can't stretch him to the next height cap, he's still got 7 or 8 pounds of muscle he can gain in this current height cap for the pro weight cap. So you can imagine that in 3-4 years time with another nearly 10 pounds of muscle going into those leaner off seasons, growing again, coming back out again. The potential progress is absolutely bonkers. But I think Niall said before when you mentioned what have you done differently this time, I think the biggest thing that I know from coaching him for the last 18-19 months is just the attention to detail over the small things, because those are the things that I've coached a lot of people in the past that have been very talented from a younger age and very genetically gifted, but they slack on the areas that are really going to set them apart. And I think the biggest change for him over the last year and a half has been he's maximized every single 1%, and that really does add up over a long period of time.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Niall knows, I always say this, and they'll always try to argue with me, all the kids that they want to be bodybuilders, but they don't want to do all the little shit because it makes a negligible difference. But that 1%, do that every day, do the math, fucking it adds up over time. And that's what separates the greats from, the guys that aren't where they want to be, I guess. But people can't seem to comprehend that. I want to ask you, do you monitor specifically things like insulin sensitivity, or do you watch everything just from like a visual standpoint?
Both. So like we run consistent blood work. We have a monitoring, especially in the off season, of where his health markers were. And for him, like he's someone that I think one of the biggest things in your off season was probably sticking to a consistent step goal per day for the off season, and that meant in a contest prep environment, I think we did 5 days at 30 minutes was max the
Yeah,
cardio ever
that
went
that
to.
was that was the highest, yeah. And then we stopped that like 2 or 3 weeks out.
It's like aerobic
How was
conditioning.
the highest cardio?
Highest cardio was 5 days of 30 minutes, 5 days a week on a treadmill
For
Yeah.
the prep?
for that entire prep. Yeah, but the majority of it was like five. I think it was like 5 sessions of 25 minutes, and then like around like the 6 week mark, it went to 30 minutes, and then yeah, by like 2 3 weeks out, we stopped.
Yeah, because you're already conditioned though.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But like that was the culmination of, a year's plus off season where it was meticulous nutrition, it was a meticulous step goal every day, it was a meticulous approach to training, and I think the longer you do that, you get really fine tuned in terms of your body being very responsive to even a very small change. Um, and I'd always use the analogy: the higher the level of bodybuilding, like if you go onto the Olympia stage or you go on a pro show and you look at that first call out, everyone is doing the 1% in that first call out, but then it sets the little bit that sets you apart is everything else that comes into it. And for Niall, his structure is something that is really going to set him aside on a lot of stages. And if he's an athlete that then crosses all the boxes and does the 1% with that structure, sky's the limit in that situation.
Yeah. How low was your food? And well, how was your highest food in the off season? What was the lowest point in the prep year?
highest food, I want to say 6.3. Is that right, Carl? Like, was it like 6.3?
I can get it for you now.
He
You'll
can,
be
he,
very
he can pull
surprised.
the numbers up.
You'll be very surprised with how low his food went, though, because it was not low at all.
Yeah, no.
Highest the food went was 6,200 calories,
Yeah.
and the lowest the food went in prep was 3,800.
Wow. What was your? Do you know what the protein was at?
375.
That sounds about right. This is another thing. I mean, Niall already knows.
Yeah.
Remember, I people think I made up the fact that bodybuilders eat more than 300 grams of protein, and I said
Yeah.
that just to try to create a trend.
No, yeah, it was that.
Off
And you know
season,
what, like,
with everything included in the off season, I think with trace calories, because you had about 1,000 grams of carbs a day. I think it was like 420, but prep was 375.
Now, I know this probably falls into that 1% thing, but what I found with myself specifically, I guess like you could say that I have more of a very adjustive metabolism. Like if I were to miss a meal for 2 days, like I will lose my hunger and the ability to actually execute that meal as efficiently, just really quick. Like I'll adapt very fast. So something that is super important for me is having to eat like clockwork at the same times every single day to get my body acclimated to that schedule. Is that something that you have your guys do as well?
Repeat that question again. Sorry.
Something that I have to do in order to when I'm pushing food to try to eat more, because I just am somebody who does not have a big appetite naturally. Like I have to get my body to work like clockwork and eat. Say I'm going to eat at 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock. I have to eat at the same times every day and basically get my body set, like acclimated to this schedule. It's not like I'm somebody who could it's going to be in this 2 to 4 hour window and just estimate it. Because if I miss that gap, it's like the hunger will come and it'll disappear. I just adjust so fast. Is that something that you have dealt with your guys?
I think especially the higher the food intake goes as well, because like if you've got someone on, and Niall's diet was just clean 6,000 calories plus, so, and maybe an intra workout. So if you've got someone on say 6 meals of 1,000 calories, even if you miss a 2 hour window for that meal to go in, you're then backed up with 2 meals in a very short space of time.
You're right.
And then your digestion starts to play up,
yeah.
and then your appetite's gone, and doing that 7 days a week really does add up.
Mm-hmm. And do you Niall, do you have problems with that at all? Do you have a bigger appetite naturally, or do you tend to be
Nah,
yeah,
I do not have a big appetite. Like when we were first at like 6.2, I remember it was tough, and then I managed to get it done. But like probably the best thing was so the last phase before we started prep, where we were in a cruise phase, and he kept the food the same, and he said to me like we need to like just stay like 253, 255, you know, to kind of hold on to the new muscle that we've built. And then obviously, you know, when you're in a you know, like you're in a surplus and you're in a growing phase, like, you know, with PEDs, your appetite is naturally bigger. And for me, whenever I would go into a cruise phase, my appetite would drop a lot. So mentally, I managed to do it every single day during that cruise phase. I didn't miss a single meal. But yeah, I like my timings were on point. You know, I started getting up a lot earlier, making sure I was getting like a certain amount of meals in every single day by a certain time. You know, I had timers on my phone to make sure that I didn't like miss the timings. But yeah, it was like that made it a lot easier. It was still a struggle, you know, like I said, because your appetite in a cruising phase in general, especially if you're as consistent as I am, anytime that, you know, you make a change, you will feel it. So if I'm used to, you know, using certain PEDs and eating this many calories and then the PEDs come down, I'm not going to be immediately, I'm going to struggle with eating the same amount of calories. But the only way for me to get it done was, you know, again, to like hit my step count, because if I, you know, was going to miss certain steps and my expenditure for the day, which is pretty much the same every day, drops, and then again my appetite's also going to drop.
mhm,
And then yeah, with the timings, I just had to make sure it was on point, and that was it was good because then I set up you know, like good habits for like in advance for prep, like getting up early, and then you know I
mhm.
can make sure my cardio, my posing, my checking. Like I was sending check-ins to Cal at like 6:30 every morning, you know, and I've already done cardio, I've already stretched, done my vacuums, done my core practice, done my posing, like, and I built up that kind of habit during the off season phase already.
Yeah, if it just comes back to all the little shit matters, you know, it's you sleep in one day, now you're behind. It's like
Yeah.
people overlook all these things, and it's that 1%. Everything affects the bigger picture some way, in some way, somehow. So you just have to have every aspect dialed in. But I want to ask you, when you started working with him, we know you started to dial in, lock in more. You were nailing all these little aspects. What do you think caused flip that switch for you to do that? Is it just because you were working with him, or is there something that had there was more pressure on you?
It was a bit of both. I mean, you know, getting last place, as much fun as the Arnold was, like when it was all said and done, you know, and it's like it's a thing of the past, and you're looking at yourself as how you want to move forward. It's like, damn, you know, I'm in a pro league and I have not beat a single pro, you know, like I haven't beat anybody. So, and then obviously, you know, I've seen the caliber of athletes that Cal has. You know, he's multiple people to the Olympia already, and like some of the progression and the transformations that pro athletes have had with him. And then again, you know, just the respect I had for him as a coach and as a person, it was like I don't want to be one of those people. I mean, you know, we see it all the time with coaches and athletes having disagreements, and then later on it comes out that like a certain athlete, you know, maybe they just slack with the diet, or they don't train hard enough, or they don't do the things that are required of them. And sometimes I think athletes take it personally, but like the coach is always just doing those things or asking those things of you to make you better. Like that's what it takes for you to get to your goal. And yeah, I think that obviously, you know, having the opportunity to work with him, coupled with the drive to I really wanted to you know, prove myself as a pro, because as an amateur I won every show I did except one regional and I got second place. So as an amateur I never placed outside of the top two. Like I won every show, and every show that I did win I also won the overall except for the one that I lost where I got second place. So I'd already set a standard of myself as being a really good, you know, amateur bodybuilder. And then, you know, it's quite a hit to go from that to like not even the judges barely looking at you and just shifting you off to the end of the call out. You know, so that was a huge factor, and it's like that you know, that like that will just push you to do whatever it takes. And then
The
obviously you have someone like Callum whose attention to detail and knowledge is so high level that you know, it is a recipe for success basically.
Yeah, yeah. So you had that the drive to prove yourself. But I would think the reason why a lot of amateurs really struggle with this, because you obviously don't see at the top, a lot of guys struggle with this. That's why they're at the top, is because there's really not that pressure on them. Like, there's no really driving reason, and especially if they're not really super passionate about bodybuilding either, like, what's really driving them to have all these little aspects nailed in when nobody's watching what they're doing? They don't have any expectations to uphold. It's like there's just not that environment. There's a lot more room to just kind of slack off and not have to meet any expectations. And then if you actually make it to a place where you're at, now there's, there's eyes on you, there's pressure. Now you're getting, second calls. Now you want to prove yourself. People are talking about you, and I think it creates more of that drive. But Callum, I'm sure you've dealt with clients who have a lot of issues, like have trouble dialing in like this and getting all these little aspects locked in. What do you do to help those guys really, nail everything?
I think you've got to use there's a lot of noise for athletes now, especially with social media and YouTube and the likes. There's a lot of noise around whether you're doing very well or whether you're not doing very well and you're underperforming. And you can leverage it and harness it, or you can really let it eat you up. And I think the best athletes have the ability to listen to what they need to listen to and then block the rest out and just focus on their own individual progression. Because I think the more you buy into all the other stuff, the less internally you're kind of channeling in the right energy. And I think a lot of, like for Niall, for example, like that whole 18 months was based on how he felt coming off stage in 2022. So any decision that he had to make in that process, whether it was off season or prep, where he was faced with a challenge, whether it be in a workout or he's not got an appetite to finish his last meal, but he pushes through, he has that discipline. Like those things are him just wanting to be better himself. And I think the people that can actually focus on the individual progression are the ones that will get the most out of their careers, of their time competing. But it's harder and harder to do when you've got everyone else's progress around you on your phone every single day for every minute you wake up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so for those guys that are amateurs and, just trying to aspire to even go pro, or they're just starting to compete and they're just not there, there's always an excuse, right? They can't do this, they can't do that. There's always something coming up. Do you just tell them, like, stay off your phone? What is your advice to help these people really dial in?
You've got to focus on the variables that are just in your controls. Like the variables that are in your control are like your how meticulous you are with your training and your application there, how you are with your diet, how you are with your recovery. And I always use the analogy, especially for like very high level athletes that might have been in the game for a longer period of time, but feel as though they are underperforming. Just go back to when you first started bodybuilding and you absolutely loved it and you're obsessed by it. And that was when you were getting up early just to do this and you were so excited to bodybuild and you do those 1%. Now imagine if you could do that right now, how much better you'd be. Because the longer you do it, the more slack you get with a lot of those variables. And you're like, oh, it doesn't matter anymore. Or I can go to bed when I want to, or I'll sleep in a bit today. It doesn't matter. All the best athletes that make the most progress are all in that 1% group where they're still in the giddy, excited phase of bodybuilding. And even on some days when they don't want to be, they still lock in because they know of what it's going to do to progress. So I remember when I first started training myself, like I was excited to wake up the next day and get all my meals in, and I'd put, on my notes on my phone of when I was going to eat them and when I was going to train. Like if you can approach it with some level of meticulousness and rigidity like that, your progression is going to absolutely skyrocket. But that comes down to the individual. Like I can give someone the plan and I can motivate them from what I have control of, but unless they focus on taking control of it themselves, then it will only go so far. And the guys and girls that make the most amount of progress are the ones that can meet me halfway to a certain degree in terms of their own motivation to maximize the progress as well.
It's funny you say that. Think back to when you first started training, because I could just remember when I was like in junior high school, I'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't the best diet, but I would literally wake up and try to eat 2 cups of dry oatmeal and eggs that I would throw up almost on a weekly basis every morning before school. I would have all my chicken and rice in a duffel bag with my supplements. I'd have a loaf of bread every 2 hours on the dot I was eating. It's because back then we also, like, there was not as much information out there, so it was just hardcore eat like a dog bodybuilding. It's like, if I don't do this, like, you're not in the 5%. I'm listening to Rich Piana every day, and it's like that was just my life. And I would go to parties and I would not even drink and just have chicken and rice and just be at the party eating chicken and rice. And it was just, it's crazy. If you maintain that mentality and that meticulousness, yeah, it's going to carry over. But then, do you think also, because like I said, there wasn't as much information out there. I feel like now there's so much information out there, and these kids are exposed to a lot of shit when they get into it, where they try to think things aren't as complicated and these things don't really matter. So I could just eat 3 meals a day and get in my calories, and it's going to be the same thing. When back then we didn't know that. Not even that I'm saying that's true, because I don't think it is that whatsoever. But it was like the only option was to do what the fucking bodybuilders are doing, and now it's like you don't have to do that. So now they're led into this. They're introduced into bodybuilding with a false perspective of what bodybuilding really is, because they have all this, like, I don't want to say science is wrong, because it's not wrong, but it's like the way that it's being construed towards social media, on social media.
Yeah, but I'd turn that around and I'd say you can make progress like that, but there'll be a time where that progress will slow down, and you're going to have to start doing those other things to maximize the rest. And like Niall's a good example of that. Like I didn't know the ins and outs of what he was doing before, but I can guarantee you, as soon as he got that placing at the Arnold, there was a lot of things behind closed doors of what he was doing when people weren't watching that contributed to what he's done over the last 18 months. And you're in a position where it's like, right, I'm going to start squeezing out as much as I can from every single thing in my day-to-day life now to maximize my own progress. And that's you can track macros and do intermittent fasting and do all this and that, and you can still make progression for a certain period of time, whatever you're doing. But there's going to be a point where that slows down, and you're going to have to look further afield and start really getting to grips with everything in your power.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Obviously, as you get more advanced, all the little things matter more and more. You're getting further and further from homeostasis. Nobody's body wants to naturally be 250 pounds of muscle.
Yeah.
But how do you go about implementing refeeds or cheat meals? Did you guys use any of that during the prep?
We used high days, yeah, and then we did have like just like an off-plan meal, but that was the same. Like I was doing my off season just once a week, and then we utilized that to like 7 weeks out, I think. But like the level of progression I was having, like with like an off-plan meal in, was just like every check-in at like even when we were still just checking in weekly rather than like 2-3 times a week, like the progress was just very significant anyway. Like I was just seeing changes in my physique that I'd never seen before. And like again, it's just because I was so meticulous, like I made sure like my cardio was, the same like level of effort, whether I woke up and I was fucking exhausted or whether I woke up and I felt good. I just made sure I was walking at the same speed every time. Like that temptation that, like in my last prep, I was so exhausted, and Cal knows some of the things I did, and there was a reason like why I was so fatigued. But like I'd be like, well, as long as I walk for 2 hours, it really doesn't matter how slow I walk. So my perceived level of effort was higher than the actual effort, where it was like I know what I can do, when I'm at my best physically and mentally. So it's just carrying that over on the tough days, on the days when I'm exhausted. I mean, like when he pulled cardio out, I was on the treadmill. Like that.
I
That's the
thought you were
kind of
going off,
headspace.
man.
That was the kind of headspace I was in this prep. Like I think I'd sent him over my check-in, and then I was on the treadmill, and he was like, "Yeah, we're dropping cardio today," and sent him a picture of me on the treadmill. I was like, "I'll come off right now."
I'm ready. So, what is give me an example of what a free meal, off-plan meal would look like.
So for me, I would probably just go out with my girlfriend to like a restaurant and just eat like, I think in general it was like a burger and fries and then like just some kind of dessert. There was nothing crazy.
Okay.
And then like sometimes we just go out for like breakfast instead. But that was very similar to my usual meal. It was just like a bagel, salmon, eggs, and oats. But it was just from a breakfast restaurant, so it was just really nice. But yeah, I'm not the kind of person that like if he says go have an off plan, like I'll go get like a 5 course thing. So the off plan's really like 3 off plans in one. Like I was more than reasonable with it, and like I said, I'm not a big eater anyway, so that would just affect my appetite for the next day.
Yeah.
So it was again, it's like making those kind of conscious decisions where it's like, even if I do have the option to kind of be relaxed, I want to make sure that it doesn't affect, when I go back to my daily routine the next day.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good point, because like I was saying with my metabolism like being adjusted, if I were to, because I've had those days before where I would miss 2 meals, now I'll just go get a burger and fries and try to make up
Yeah,
calories, and
yeah,
now it's like now my metabolism's fucked. Now I'm not even hungry the next morning, so now there's this
yeah. Next
whole
morning, yeah,
process. It's just not that simple. But when you're implementing those off plan meals, Calum, is that mainly for a psychological aspect, or to get a metabolic response too?
So in the off season, it would just be something that would just layer onto his weekly calories, and it's just like a little bit of a mental reset from the monotony of the meals, and it gives him a little bit of social time as well. But we
yeah. I was
continued
gonna
that in
say,
prep.
for me, it's the social time. Like it keeps the relationship going to be able to
Yeah,
go out to eat. At least once a
100%.
week.
And that's like even like stress management wise for an athlete. Like if you have that little bit of a just breathe a little bit, it can be a powerful tool across the week. Um, but we pulled that I think at 6 weeks out, and then that was around the time that I started to implement. It might have been once every week. A couple of weeks we missed it maybe, and then it started to become maybe two in a row where we would change the off plan meal to a full day of tracked food, but it would just be an increase on his baseline diet from the carbohydrates he was having. So like if his baseline diet was say 500 carb, it would be 750 for that day, or 800 for that day, or 850. And I was just getting around to just play around with what the look did based on the higher implementation of carbs and a little bit more fat, because it gives him the ability to drop fatigue when he has those higher days, and it gives him a little bit of a boost in training in terms of performance as well. But it also gives us an idea of where the look goes to in terms of how much it takes to really max the look out fullness wise, and then that ends up forming into how we approach the final week in terms of stage as well. So we've got our numbers in play for what I think he'll need when we actually get to stage in the first place. And I think the benefit of that is you get perfect predictability from the standpoint of digestion as well. And for classic physique and hitting a vacuum and midsection control, like that's your money piece at the end of the day for a lot of those poses. But it also gives me the ability to, when he is really digging at the back end of prep, like giving him 2 days worth of maintenance calories or above is a big help from a fatigue management standpoint. And then I know I can put him back in the deficit for 5 days and inch forwards again. And then we've got another day or a couple of days of feeding. Whereas the off plans were just like, you would have metabolized that by the following morning. Like sometimes you didn't even gain any weight from the off plan meals. It was just part of the weekly calories.
Yeah, you burn right through it. I know some guys. So you said you're pulling the off plan meal around like 6 weeks out. So is that typically what you do? Most of your guys is you're just from a certain point out you're just doing more controlled refeeds and don't do any off plan meals, because some guys will do a burger like every weekend, and then they'll use that too during the peak week process, which I don't know how I feel about it. I feel like there's a lot more variables at play there, I guess, if you practice it every week. But have you done both methods, or you stick with the refeeds?
I've done both. The only thing I am not a massive fan of is like especially for international travel, is like not having access to the same foods and the same meals or the same locations he was eating. And if we're on the go and we're in a different supermarket, like chicken, rice, and pineapple is pretty easy to replicate anywhere in the world. But if I was getting him to have a burger and a certain portion of fries and this and that, it's very hard to standardize day to day, week to week. And then we don't know how the body's going to respond or digest that or process it. So typically for most people, I would just be predictability's the number one goal. And if I can control and know what's going in, then I know the outcome that's going to happen as well.
Okay. And throughout when you give those refeeds, you're saying that the higher day at maintenance or whatever, are those on training days or off days?
We played around with both. We played around with some on rest days where you just reset and let that food soak up, and then we played around with some on training days as well. I think by the end of it was one rest day and then the following training day, wasn't it?
Okay. Yeah. Now, typically in an off-season setting, or even just through the beginning of prep, are you still doing somewhat of like a carb cycling approach? Do you keep off days lower? Do you have like a midday, a high day, or do you keep food across the board all 7 days of the week?
He just had a training day and a non-training day. So his training day was slightly higher. Like if I look at the peak off-season calories, training day calories were at peak off-season were 6,200, and peak off-season rest day calories were 5,150. So about 1,000 calories difference there. But there's 2 rest days and 5 training days. So it gives like the rest day diet gives us a little bit of respite for the GI just to have to process a little bit less food, and energy demands are going to be lower on those rest days from no training anyway. So it's I don't know how much you felt that in terms of rest days being easier to eat. You probably didn't by the end of the off season, but it
No,
definitely does
I
play a role.
actually found rest days harder by about like the fourth meal
Because
because
you weren't
again I just
moving.
don't have the appetite. Yeah, and it's 1,000 calories less, but like if you gave me the option, I'd rather choose a training day because that's probably because as well like the level of intensity going into my training, I would actually be hungry,
Yeah.
whereas like by my third meal on a rest day, even if I've done the majority of my steps, which again my step count was lower. I think it was like 8K, which is not a lot of steps. So 8K, and then I'm 3 meals in, and I've got nothing else to do with the rest of the day other than just stay at home. It is going to be a bit more of a challenge than like getting those steps in and training, and then obviously like I practice my posing through the off season as well, which again is just a bit more expenditure.
Do you factor that into
So yeah,
cardio?
I no, like I just practice my posing as much as I need to. It's just kind of like obviously, people who do practice posing will understand like how much it does take out of you when you do it properly.
Mm-hmm. So do you ever do you have guys do designated like rounds of posing during a prep, like tell them to do 4 rounds after fasted cardio or something like that, or you just tell them like make sure you're practicing your posing?
Yeah, so like we had for the end of prep, Sammy helped a little bit in terms of the calls, didn't you? But I knew you were
Yeah.
like, for someone that I know is not massively in on presentation, I'll have to force it a little bit more in terms of like, I need you to do these rounds and I need you to send me these rounds for now, because I know that that was a big factor for him in terms of really wanting to be immaculate with his presentation. Like I could see from his check-ins, he was really dialed in. So I just let him to stay in that routine, and we went from there.
Okay, and tell me about your
You're gonna get some people that check in and they can't do a quarter turn. You're like, yeah, we probably need to spend a bit more time rinsing this.
oh yeah, I just don't know if you because some guys do it for like an aspect of cardio, because if you go through 4 or 5 rounds of posing, like it is very fucking
Yeah.
taxing. It's a lot of energy expenditure. So I don't know if you like program that in there, like do this on these days just to add into more energy expenditure.
The only thing that he just said was like when he was sending over the updates, it would just say, with fasted cardio, just like use that time to put some posing rounds in as well. But obviously with myself, I just had like my own structure, so I did that. But I also already had like a certain amount of posing that I would like require myself to do every single day.
Now, tell me about your peaking process. You practice it the weeks prior. That's obviously always ideal. You want to practice, know what you're doing. Do you? Is it always obviously it's always different, but do you have like a preferred method, whether it's front loading, back loading? Do you specifically tend to do things with sodium and water? Do you cut water, leave them in? How do you usually go about those things?
I'd say Niall's example for Toronto is probably as immaculate as it could possibly be, because
Yeah.
we literally did not change a single thing.
No.
Like for the goal for everyone will be, and weight caps have a part to play in changing the setup, but like the goal for everyone will be, if I can find a day-to-day look which is perfect at a week out, then we're just trying to replicate that on stage and take it 7 days later on stage. The only thing that Niall had was the day-to-day look for us on that end diet was hovering around 230 to 231, and we wanted to play it safe with the lowest weight cap that you could have, which was 227. If he heighted in slightly shorter, he'd be there. So we knew that there were 3 pounds ish for scale weight to drop in that final few days. So the only thing we did was we ran the same baseline diet, which was, I've got it here, 375 protein, 44 grams of fat, 467 grams of carbs at the end of prep. That was with that was what he had from 3 days out from stage. And then the day that he traveled, we just basically pulled the carbs from the meals and just kept the protein and veg for those, for the travel day. And then the day before, so 1 meal carbs and 5 meal no carb. And that took him from 230 to 223, I
Yeah,
think, at the end of but you
dropped
shift
two
back
two
6 pounds.
2.8 was the lowest. Dropped a shit ton of weight in those 2 days.
So a lot of fluid going out, GI volume emptying, made weight, and then I just basically took him back to the diet that we practiced for the high days, which was about 750 carb across the 6 meals, and got hydration back to where it was, got sodium per meal back to where it was, got water back to where it was, and just found the look again.
Okay.
But like for us, that will then be, it's, you've got full control because you're very familiar with the set point you're moving back to, and there's nothing there that's guesswork. Like I know that because we had a day's grace in between weigh-in and stage on Sunday, I know that as long as I can get him back to this diet by the end of Saturday, I know what he's going to look like on Sunday, and I know where his body weight's going to be. And it was for us, mate. It was just basically finding that 230 again, wasn't it?
So you're not really playing with water or soda. You're trying to keep everything the same, keep all variables consistent.
No, literally, like no diuretics, no like crazy carb load. Like we're basically, I knew what the meals would be. It would just be a case of like we knew what to buy. It was just a case of what the measurements would be, per meal based on the check-ins that I was sending him throughout the day.
Yeah.
And obviously, like he probably, it was most of the time like he already had an idea of what it would be because we'd done it before. It was just like obviously I would send him a look just to confirm, and then he'd be like, yeah, go ahead with these meals. But yeah, I imagine in comparison to, I mean, we were
Mm-hmm.
perfectly peaked. Like the judges even said that, and I could kind of just tell that based on how I felt. My look. I never had like, sometimes you kind of have like look great going into a show. You look great when you wake up, and then when you actually start having those meals, your look isn't as dry or as hard as it was when you first woke up. And it's like, well, now, you've got to come in with a look that basically is just worse than what it was a few hours ago. Whereas with me, I was getting better throughout the day. I remember uh, when I was pumping up for finals, and Cal walked off, and he came back when I was pumped up, and just the look on his face, I was like, yeah, this is definitely the best I've ever looked in my life.
Fucking even on show day, like nothing changes. You're just drinking water as normal.
Yeah,
Nothing.
yeah, literally the same exact same routine as the day before.
Okay. So ideally for you, Calum, when do you? You've been doing this for 10 years, so I'm sure you've run into all scenarios. Ideally, when do you want to have that look finalized and know they're ready? By how far out?
The weekend before, but realistically before that, because the weekend before we should already really have the approach that we're going to take with the diet. So, like I'd always say, whatever timeline you have into a show, just take 2 weeks off the end and be ready at that -2 week mark, because then the last 2 weeks is just kind of cruising into stage and making sure nothing goes wrong. Um, Particularly if you're traveling, like he had a 8.5, 9 hour flight. You had, I think it was two flights, Ireland and then Ireland to
Yeah,
Canada. Like we
we had the
can't be in a
4 hour
position.
layover, so it was 16 hours of travel altogether to get actually, before we could relax
Yeah,
again.
we can't be in a position where I'm not, like, I don't know where the look is when he's going to wake up. Like we need to be in a position where it's almost, I could almost at that stage have peaked him into stage without even seeing his photos, just by seeing his body weight, because we knew, right, as long as you're under the cap, right, he's under the cap, we're going to move back here, we're going to find that 230 again, then you're just going to hold it. And we practiced that so much that like you could have even done that without even seeing him.
Now, did you continue training as normally going to the show? Did you back off training?
Last couple sessions, yeah, we so that's basically what he's talking about, was like being ready at 2 weeks out. So from there, we just pulled the inflammation, which, I was in such good condition that I didn't realize that I had quite. Obviously, he recognized it, but I didn't realize. I mean, the first couple of days he pulled out my cardio. I checked in, and my hamstrings just came out of nowhere, and they were visible anyway, but the dryness just came through. Glutes would just get harder, lower back, and like I mean, the last like week and a half, every single day, because steps was slowly getting reduced. I was resting more. Did my last heavy intense leg session, and then like we reduced again the activity, and by like Monday, I was like, I'm changing every single day. And then yeah, the week of the show, we just did like we reduced sets, and then we trained with 2 hour instead.
So when did you stop training prior to the show? Because the show was Sunday.
So last workout was Friday. Yeah, which is obviously is different for me, doing it that way. But yeah, it was the sessions were just more about, utilizing, especially the Friday session, because we did have a few carb meals after we weighed in.
So for
Just about utilizing that glycogen
glycogen
that we did have for the
for
last day.
glycogen depletion.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm assuming you've been in this situation before where, it didn't run this smoothly and you didn't have the immaculate peak. What do you do in those situations where, you don't get to find that look early and, you're running short on time?
Yeah, I've pretty much been in every situation you can possibly think of, both good and bad, and at some different location in the world. Um, I think you just get better at it over time in terms of like troubleshooting. Like I'd always say the higher up the bodybuilding gets and the more pressure that gets in those environments with the athletes and the expectations, a lot of that is there's a lot of reactive decision making when things happen on the fly that aren't predicted, that you just need to deal with. And I think that just comes with experience dealing with the athlete, but also dealing with the situation. And then you got to view it as like if you're in a boat and the boat starts to steer off track, you've got to gradually start pulling it back in. And that's probably not one decision. That might be over 8, 10, 12 hours into stage, but you've got to make small adjustments and then just keep monitoring it until you're back into the path that you were. And that's how you manage those processes. It's never a right, change this and then you're going to be back to where you need to go. It's literally going to be, you're going to have to monitor it every hour until you're back to where you need to be.
Yeah.
Whether that's, waking up heavier on the day of your weigh-ins, or whether that's, checking in at 7 p.m. the night before stage and the look's starting to soften over and spill because of X, Y, and Z. It's just communication on that front.
If you have somebody who is behind, say we have, 5 weeks, whatever, do you still implement things like refeeds, those high carb days for some metabolic purpose, or you're just putting them at, we're just driving cardio up, bringing food down to try to get them down?
Yeah, like unless they were stalling, but like a lot, we've got to think a lot of these guys, they're also going to be enhanced. So if we're in a contest prep situation where we're seeing a lack of response, then that might be pull blood, see what's going on, correct it. That might be something medicinal with, thyroid replacement. That might be, whatever it might be. Like we've got a lot of tools in the toolbox to push the response there. And sometimes as a coach, you need to step in and say, look, the original timeline is not realistic. You're not going to look your best. You need to rethink and give ourselves a little bit more time. Sometimes that ruffles feathers and doesn't go to plan, but at the end of the day, like you're trying to do the best for the athlete. But if it is time constraint and you only have 5 weeks, then you're going to be digging for longer than ideal, and then you're going to have time to try and pull it back to stage and drop fatigue before you get on stage.
And what do you do with the natural athletes? Because obviously they're not able to use T3, so the only way in that case is just refeeds now.
Yeah, and that would be like for a natural prep. Like I've got a couple of guys who are WMBF and PMBF. I think it's PMBF pros. One bodybuilder and a couple of men's physique, and they're guys that budget very long preps and they run diet breaks in the preps themselves. So they might have 12-week block, 2 weeks back into maintenance, go again, and they just basically inch their way there. So the contest prep itself might end up being 30 weeks instead of 16 or 18 or 20, but they're kind of preempting the fact that they're probably going to have to pull back at some point because the response is going to slow down, and you can just build that into the prep timeline.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I was going to say, Niall, when is the Olympia? Because they always change the date.
It's the 10th to the 13th of October this year.
10th to the 13th of October. So that gives us, how much time? 4 months?
17
yeah,
weeks.
pretty much 17 weeks.
What's the game plan from now to then?
So we literally just called about this like 2-3 hours ago.
What'd you come up with?
So, Carl, you want to go ahead?
So we made the decision to not pursue any more shows before the Olympia because I feel as though, and I've been in this situation on the other side of the coin where we've kept on going to try and get 2 or 3, and the athlete has psychologically and physically start to deteriorate and not had time to pull fatigue back before the Olympia, and then they end up not delivering their best on the stage that really counts. So for Niall, I think the Toronto and the outcome of that show and the statement that we made was big enough for us to just go, right, we're going to park this now. You've qualified. Let's leave that momentum where it is in our back pocket. And if we've got 17 weeks, then it's going to end up being 7 weeks of resetting and pulling fatigue down and getting his body as healthy as we can, as responsive as we can, and closer to the weight cap than we were when he started his, actual prep at 250 odd. And then run a 10-week diet into the Olympia and just repeat that process, but from a leaner, better set point than we prepped at this time. So if you've got 17 weeks, go on.
Also for us, our feedback was to come back, looking the same. So it's not like we've had the feedback of you need to be significantly sharper, or the fullness needs to be different, or we need you're lacking a certain body part. Obviously, we both know that I need to grow. It's not like I'm going into the Olympia and I have the exact physique I need. But the two of the judges that gave me that feedback to come in with the same look are Olympia judges. They're going to be on the Olympia panel, so it's not like feedback that you would take lightly. So yeah, we've got a goal where it's basically to repeat what we've just done. It's not like we need to do something different or we have a different focus.
Yeah, it's fucking great. They just want you to come in and exactly how you did. So, I mean, that's really all you need to do, I guess. Now, what was I going to say here? Fuck, I lost it.
I think the interesting thing for the feedback was, I can't remember if it was Paul or Becky that said it, but they were like, I don't know what they're going to do with you, if that makes sense, because his shape is so unique that it stands out very quickly in a lineup. And I think for Niall, if you're in a position like, I'd almost rather present at that first Olympia with them knowing this guy's still got 10 pounds to his weight cap and he can grow for the next 5 years non-stop, but he's already got shape and condition to match anyone on that stage. I'd rather go there and them say that than them say, he wasn't actually as sharp as he was in Toronto. Because that's the backward step for us. Like, we want to be in a position where, we show them enough. We're 100% respectful for the guys that are already there because this is the top of the sport now, but we just want to leave our foot in the door and make a good impression and shake hands with the right people and then go away and do the work.
Yeah, sounds great. Now, you're saying, this is what I was going to say, is he has 10 pounds to grow, right? So you're saying that can be over the course of a few years. So what is the difference in how you execute spreading that over a few years versus, like, if you look at guys like Keon, right? The progress that he made, the guys you could put that on in one offseason done right, combined with genetics and the right approach, right? Obviously, at that point, you would have no more room to grow from that point on. So what really would be the positive or the downside from putting that size on now in 1 year and filling out that cap versus spreading out over 5 years?
He will take as much as his body will give him in that first offseason next after the Olympia. But with classic physique, like, there's a lot of guys in that division now in the top 5 of the Olympia who have been at that weight cap for many years in a row. And then it's just a process of refinement. And for someone this advanced, even with the genetics that he has, like, 10 pounds of genuine muscle in one phase is still a lot of tissue. It's a lot of muscle. Even if he could put 5 pounds on and go from 222 bottomed out to his cat to 225, 226, it's an immense change in the actual visual look. So I think for him, it's like that post-show phase and that off-season will take as much as his body will give us, but we're under no illusion that he can continue doing that for a long time as well to come.
I weighed in lighter than I weighed in for the Arnold 2 years ago, and I'm significantly more muscular. I mean, there's a pinned post on my Instagram right now of comparing Toronto to the Arnold, and I look smaller and less conditioned on the Arnold stage, and I weighed in 3 pounds heavier, with a lot of a harder struggle to make weight than this. I mean, I'd say obviously, the prep was a challenge because I pushed myself, but it wasn't like, I was starving myself or I was on a treadmill for hours and hours every single day, or I was using, like loads of T3 or something like that. It was quite literally just the worst it got to, like he said, was just a few no or very low carb days, which, for the average person, they're going to deal with that in their prep a lot longer than I did.
Do you think there is issues that come with guys who try to push too much too soon, especially with like the use of a ton of growth hormone and things of that nature? Specifically, we see it in open more than anything, where guys will try to, guys blow up relatively fast. Obviously, due to food, due to the drugs, but then we also see with that, from what I've seen anecdotally, is like a lot of these guys will start to like lose lines and things of that when these transformations tend to happen in shorter time frames rather than it happening more gradually.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why judges give feedback like they did to Niall this weekend. When they say, like, look, take your time.
Uh-huh.
The reason why they're saying that is because he's just won the first pro show this year, first one and done. The reason why he's done that is because of the lines and how clean and well presented the look was. Whereas if he goes away now and says, right, I'm going to have to gain 10 pounds to try and have a crack at the top 5 of the Olympia now, well, that you do that so many times and you've now lost the midsection and the lines that got you to where you were in the first place. And in open, it's even worse because these guys will gain 15, 20 pounds in a year. And you've got to do that 2 or 3 years and then your physique is never the same again.
Yeah.
So I think that patient approach, particularly in classic, I think the weight cap is a blessing there because it really forces guys to be patient. But that's why you see these beautiful physiques in that division, just because the guys are forced to spend longer developing their physiques, and that represents in the look that you're seeing on stage as
What
well.
do you think really contributes to that? Like, why is that occurring if you try to put on so much size in a year versus being more gradual? Why are your lines worse? Is it the skin thickness from growth hormone, things like that?
It's the aggression of toxicity and compound use that you're having to do to drive that rate of tissue development, that rate of recovery, and that rate of continuous calorie exposure as well. Like the pathways that you're upregulating for that level of aggression over that length of time is going to have a really big toll on the body. And it's really just, it's like for a lot of guys that are putting on a lot of muscle, it's just stress exposure, PED exposure, calorie exposure over and over and over again for a long period of time. And that will happen eventually, but it just depends on how quickly the rate of progress will be.
Makes sense. Now, do you tend to favor longer cycle approaches or short cycles with breaks in between them?
Typically, like off-season phase, it will probably be 16 to 20 weeks of escalation, which is just gradual from a base up to like peak load. And then they'll spend usually 8 weeks, which 4 of that is the clearance of the last stat usually, but 8 weeks of down to whether it's physiological or just above it for a more advanced athlete who's got a little bit more to go off, and just run in those cyclical blocks where you can have a systemized way of where you're reviewing blood work from one phase to the next, looking at regression or progression within those markers, and you're just repeating that pattern. I think Niall did that 2 or 3 times in the phase that we had for that off season. Rinsed off, reset, held the body weight, held the tissue on, went again. And in between those phases, like in an off season setting, you can spend that time pulling any body fat off that doesn't need to be there, dropping inflammation, resetting appetite, and just staying in control the entire time, as opposed to like going hell for leather out the gate in the off season for the first 6 months and then just being cooked for the last 6 months because the body's just so done with what you're trying to throw at it.
And during a prep, are you typically staying within that same time frame, 16, 20 weeks, or do you start sooner? Do you try to like implement things like clenbuterol closer to the show rather than further out? I know some guys will like literally start clen at 16 weeks out no matter what. Other people just completely wait to throw it in.
Yeah. The duration of exposure from an androgen perspective is probably very similar, 16 to 20 weeks, because it will reflect the length of the prep. And that will be after a phase where they've cruised or nearly cruised pre-prep. So health markers are in the best possible position. And like lipolytics, like, clenbuterol, etc. It will be done as a as a tool once I feel as though I've taken enough from the diet and the expenditure. So like we might be 8 weeks out or we might be 12 weeks out, but the rate of change has already been pretty drastic, and I've already changed a lot within the energy balance just from diet and output. And then I know, right, if I play 20 micrograms of clen or 40 micrograms of clen in that morning window, I can then just squeeze a little bit more out without having to touch cardio or steps or the diet. And the same thing goes for down regulation of that metabolic side closer in prep as body weight comes down and as food goes down. Like we might need to then keep an eye on where thyroidal function is through blood work, and then we could replace what we need to replace or upregulate what we need to upregulate when the time comes. You didn't use any thyroid medication in this prep, did you?
No, there's
Any,
at least I've ever used in terms of that side.
and I'm pretty sure
I
your
mean,
clen was
it was minimal.
yeah.
That's great. And what do you think?
It was but that for that I just comment like for that that's just a perfect pre-prep phase and just the right start point for where you needed to be at the start of prep. And I think a lot of guys and girls that end up, and I've been there with athletes, end up having to push too hard. It's because they just didn't start in the position they needed to get towards the look that they wanted to get to in the time frame they budgeted. And that's when you get to 10 weeks out and you're like, oh geez, we're gonna have to use this and that and add this and see what happens here. Like if you nail the start point, you'll find it a lot easier to get to the end point as well.
So you think just poor planning is a very common theme, one of the biggest things? What would you say is like some of the biggest, I don't want to say wrong, things that are done wrong, but poor executions of a prep that are most commonly seen by you, whether it's thyroid, overuse of T3. I know there's some guys that are, famous for that. I'm not going to say anything, but, they just 150 micrograms of T3 from 10 weeks out, no matter what, and completely fuck their thyroid up. We see people, just abuse a lot, go, shows back to back to back. What do you see most commonly occur that shouldn't be occurring?
Like there's going to be a law of diminishing return with all of those PEDs, whether it's an androgen or a lipolytic or a thyroid medication, whatever it might be, or like even a diuretic interstage. Like there's a lot of the more aggression that you play, the more you're going to have to deal with the body fighting back if you overplay it. And like the lipolytic, like the clenbuterol, the T3 will be like you're just going to get stringy and wiry and start atrophying tissue at the end of prep if you overplay that. For prep, I always think it's the start point and the amount of time that you've given yourself that has the biggest impact, because if you have enough time, you're not going to make those decisions irrationally to actually add them in the first place. And that pre-prep phase and the start of prep really dictates how the prep is going to be run and operated. And you are going to get coaches that, and we've seen it all before, that the start point at 20 weeks out is like obscene usage from the start. But there's just, when you see that, just be mindful that that's probably not the only way to do things. And there's certain methodologies that they just stick to, and everyone is put on the same plan. Everyone's put on the same structure. And if they're working with 500 people, then 50 people it's going to work, and 450 it's not. But you don't see the other 450 on their Instagram, so you don't know.
That's a very good point. They only showcase the best guys, the guys who get them all the exposure. It's very common theme, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In this industry. Now, do you have a preference with? I'm assuming like you are in favor of never having to use diuretics, but do you come across cases where you often do have to use them?
Yeah, if I can get away with not using it, it always makes life a lot easier. And particularly for like this weekend's example, I could see certain athletes regressing across the day, and it's most likely because of the fact they've used a diazide or an aldactone the night before or the week of. And going into the night show, it's then a much harder process to manage during the day for the actual, like if you've peaked for prejudging and now you've got 5 hours to the night show and you need to make up points, it's really hard to maximize the look again 5 hours ahead. Whereas if you're not using anything and you're ready, I put another meal and a little bit more water and a little bit more salt, and he's coming in even fuller and harder for the night show and even fresher. So ideal world, we wouldn't use anything, but you are going to get people that have to use them either to make weight or to pull sub-Q fluid off once they've loaded, if that's needed. Or people that just build it into the protocol, like people will backload into stage and then they'll use a diazide to manage fluid the night before stage because that's how they like to peak people and they find it predictable. You know, there's so many ways of doing this, and everyone's got their own individual preference.
Yeah. And do you, how do you feel about the use of Letro? Everybody always, I feel like that's a common theme where everybody thinks, got to use Letro at the tail end of a freak. Letro is like what we need to use.
They don't say that in the UK.
No, I was about to say, I think that's the most
Is that American thing?
Definitely an American thing.
That's good to hear, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I would run away from letrozole for a long time, and then run away some more.
Do you prefer Aromacin or Arimidex?
It depends. Like access and reliability of source is also a big part there. But I could use either. But if we're using something to control conversion there, I would. So the common misconceptions there for guys would be like, is it a prolactin-based issue or is it an estrogen-based issue? And if we're in a position where it's either one of those, can we manage it from the standpoint of the actual stack design first? So like, can we manage it via more DHT use relative to testosterone in the stack? Are we over-converting from testosterone being too high? I'm not a big test guy. Like I don't push test really aggressively, but I do use DHT derivatives quite aggressively in off-season and contest prep situations, which allows better control of estrogen in the first place. So the actual use of AIs is relatively minimal because they get in the management from a Proviron or a Masteron or a Primobolan, and then testosterone for a lot of individuals just you know, it's crept up to where I feel as though they can still manage it with no issue there. Like I'm never going to be in a position where I want someone, if their tolerance set point's 500 milligrams, and I'm like, right, we're gonna do 800, but you're gonna do a milligram of Arimidex 3 times a week just to manage it. Or I'd rather just use 500 and then get the rest of the milligram from like Primo or Master.
Okay, so what do you consider very aggressive test use?
I'd say aggression to the point where I don't see massive benefit above that dose would probably be something like 750 to 800 milligrams a week.
Okay.
And that's for like, you're talking like 300 pound open bodybuilder going to those
really?
grams.
To go above or at 750 to 800?
Yeah. At or above.
Okay. I feel like 500 and 750 is like, I feel like you'd say that's probably like the normal standard dose that most guys would stick to now.
I don't know. I guess it depends who you are.
So then with that being said, do you think that there's a difference in the results that you get from different compounds in terms of actual like muscle building capabilities? Because you also hear guys say like, you know, Primo is just as strong as test, Tren is just as strong as test. And I've honestly never experienced that. I have never experienced running 400 Primo versus 400 Deco or Tren and getting the same results in an off season.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing there with compound selection is where the athlete feels best relative to compound use. Like where appetite holds, where they feel best, where they sleep best, where they train best. Like if you can balance all those things, then you start to get an idea as to the kind of compound selection that you can use and rely on to get the most out of them as well. Whereas if you've got a guy on prep and you add in, 100 milligrams of Tren Ace, and they're like, look, dude, I haven't slept for 3 days and now I can't wake up and do cardio, I can't do this. Or it might be an off-season setting where you add in like an androlone and they're like, oh, my appetite is gone. The benefit that you're getting from the compound and the extra milligram a week is not worth the disadvantage of it being there. So I'm pretty to the book in terms of the compounds that I like to use and rely on, and I don't really steer too far away from that. There's always individual preference there, but I'd always still back that towards where the athlete feels best. Mm-hmm. And usually that revolves around the same kind of compounds for most people.
Do you find that there's specific scenarios or like types of individuals that may respond to a specific compound more so than another? Like I've heard guys say that, guys who are a lot skinnier and have, a lot trouble just putting on size may respond better to, you know, a Deca or MPP rather than a Primo or off season, or guys who are just like more heavy set, like, you know, they run Primo and they blow up. So have you found some common theme with the compound selection between certain types of individuals?
Yeah, I think the big thing there is like looking at what's happening from the standpoint of how the drug is metabolized and what it does. So like, for example, the example of like a skinnier, like a hard gainer type situation where they feel as though they respond best to a nandrolone or a, you know, an MPP, a Deca, or a, you know, even like oral usage like a an Anadrol or a Dianabol, something like that. They get it. They feel as though they're getting a bigger response because those compounds are going to be accompanied with fluid and a lot more fluid in terms of usage. They're getting more retention intramuscularly and subcutaneously, and they're seeing a bigger response on the scales, and they're seeing a bigger response in terms of pumps and fullness. But the only thing we've got to think about is like a lot of that gain is artificial, and once those compounds are gone, the weight goes as well. So I'd always use the analogy like compound selection. Some are going to be accompanied with more retention and some aren't. Like a Primo would be minimal, an MPP would be more substantial. I would just take the fluid factor away and look at what that's giving you longer terms. Like if you were to pull the drug out and you lose 10 pounds in 3 days, that tells me that the 220 you saw on the scales is not 220. You're not carrying and holding that body weight. And I'd always use the PD selection preference wise towards that conversation.
Okay, so let's give a hypothetical here. It's just, where would you stand on, say somebody, let's just use Deca versus Masteron for example, right? Say they're getting that extra fluid from it. That's what's coming with it. They're saying these jumps in scale, but also, you know, they tend to feel better with the Deca usage. They tend to, you know, they're getting those better pumps, and they're also seeing maybe like some more aggression in the gym, more strength. Would you argue that would potentially lead to better progress over the span of a cycle rather than opting for Primo where they really don't feel those things and they don't, you know, feel like it's working as effectively? Maybe it still is, but just those aspects that they're getting from the Deca in the short time frame can translate to better results for that individual.
Yeah, and that can be part of the overall stat. Like that can be part of the stat design because we're also thinking like we're stimulating that 90 nil pathway with the Deca, and we're stimulating the DHT derivative with the Primobolan. So we can use both to our advantage, and we can have all of them play a role. But I'd think like, and that, you know, you're going to get, you know, certain performance benefits with like a little bit more joint health with the nandrolone usage, and you might see a little bit less injury and wear and tear with training, and 100%, and that's going to accompany progression in the gym. But I think we need to look at it for face value as to why those compounds are having the impact they have, and just not like glorify our MPP as the best tool for growth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, MPP works because these things are happening and it needs to slot into the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like you get this like soundbite thing with podcasts where it's like, oh, this dude says MPP is the greatest tool for growth, so this kid is now going to take a gram of MPP and just hope for the best.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just got to think like it fits in with the bigger picture. And maybe if we've got this 20-week cycle, maybe we know Test and Primo are going to take 4 weeks to saturate, and they're going to take a little bit longer to build up in the blood. Maybe we use MPP for those first 8 weeks to accelerate the initial progression, and then back off the MPP when the Test and the Primo are saturated, and then use those compounds after that. Like there's so many ways we can think about it.
Yeah, I definitely get you. You do get a lot of those sound bites. I think a lot of those, with what you're saying, you know, I don't know if this stemmed from Victor or whatever. I'm sure you know who Victor is. You know?
Oh, yeah. He's currently got me blocked on Instagram like most of the other people.
Yeah, he's gone. But yeah, a lot of that come from him, and a lot of people, you know, fell under the umbrella of there's no point to like ever use nandrolones. Let's just only use DHT derivatives, offset the androgen to estrogen ratio, and it's like, I feel like that's just such a limiting way to approach things. Like, yes, there's that reasoning for implementing them, and we can do that. They have that place, but why would you completely disregard, you know, nandrolone use? Why would you completely disregard potentially throwing orals in if it's going to help you in that long-term picture? Sure, it's like DHT derivatives can be good for this, but this is not to say that these things aren't more beneficial in these aspects as well.
Yeah, 100%. And like the whole thought process that Victor has is incredibly valuable, and he's a super smart guy, and you know I learned a lot from him over the last couple of years. But you're right in saying you're going to get situations where, sticking to the book, so to speak, you need to break past plateaus and progression points, and there are tools that you can do that with. But the only thing is, like, as long as you've got a thought process to how you're going to apply it and how long you're going to apply it for, map it out and run it and see how you get on. Monitor your blood work, track your health markers, and if there are things that don't quite work, then you can see that on paper and you can adjust your approach. But 100%, like, we shouldn't confine ourselves to just 2 compounds for the rest of our life, because there is going to be a point where we're going to have to go further afield and utilize other tools to break past progression points that we've not been past.
And do you sometimes utilize, I know that a lot of guys are now completely against orals in an off-season phase. Are you the same way, or do you sometimes implement them too?
So the oral equation, I think, is the only, like, as everyone says, the only thing we need to manage is appetite. So, like, I wouldn't want to use an oral that tanks appetite and tanks GI function. I've used like for certain situations where we've wanted to get a quicker response out of the gate. I've used orals at the front load of an off season to get a little bit more out of those first 4 weeks, or maybe towards the back end of the off season, once I didn't want to take the injectable load any higher because of the oil volume, we could use an oral to bump the androgen load up. Like, if anyone's taking like a gram of Primo a week and it's 100 meg per mil, it's not very nice after you've done it for 16 weeks because you're pinning like 10 mil a week. But yeah, that could be used in that context. But I'd just say with the orals, like, just be really mindful of the impact it's having on getting your meals in and how you feel in terms of digestion your meals as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's why I honestly fucking hate Primos, because the injection volume. It gets to me so much. How do you deal with that? I mean, I know you don't run a lot, but just managing scar tissue accumulation. Are you pinning every day? Do you like to do every other day? How are you breaking that up? And do you also lean towards longer ester compounds so they have less volume, or do you utilize short too? I mean, obviously depending on the situation, but I would assume if you can avoid.
Well, we used like a little bit more of a higher frequency than I had before, but I actually felt healthier because of it. And then obviously, with the scar tissue, I just kind of rotated into different areas, different injection sites. So it wasn't, and like I said, my numbers aren't. I don't put them out there just
Yeah.
because someone will say the bullshit. They'll just say the bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, but they are lower. Probably lower than what most people would guess. So I didn't really have a scar tissue issue much at all throughout the off season and the prep. And then as far as the esters, yeah, we used the longer ones, and it was only kind of during the end of the prep phase where we started using a little bit more fast acting things.
Okay. Now, how do you?
And that fast acting, I'll comment, was just because he needed to pull everything out to be in a position where he could control his body weight as well. So it just give us more control over getting the look and body weight where it needed to be pre-stage. But I'll just say, like, the cool thing for me is when you get someone like Niall, like, you're in a position, and I say this all the time, like, the guys that are on the trajectory for the top of the sport over time, and the ones that are going to really do well, are always the ones that you'd be shocked at how little they're being in terms of aggression to get to their goal. And it really is, it's the 1%, it's genetics, and it's what you can do with your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, their usage is going to get a little bit more over time. But at the start, when they start breaking through, it's not the grams and grams and grams that are getting them there. It's everything else. And a lot of guys that are seeing podcasts like this will just think, like, there's a comment on your post the other day where it was like, oh,
yeah,
on what?
and that's the thought process.
The comment was something like, so it was my transformation from 2022 to 2024, and the guy had tagged Calum, because obviously I'm guessing he just knew who we were, and then someone had commented and said something like, just about how like Calum just has obviously just used crazy drugs to get me there, and that's it.
Yeah.
It was translated from German, so it wasn't quite it wasn't perfectly translated, but yeah, the overall gist of it was just basically saying that all Callum's success with all of his pros and getting results like mine is just due to his heavy drug use.
And the irony is, like, before, like 5 years ago, before I started coaching more guys like this, I also thought that. I was like, the only way that they're getting these results is they must be absolutely nailing gear, and they must be being super aggressive with everything they're doing. But the more you spend time in that, you start to realize the important stuff is actually the other stuff, because over time, you are going to have to be more assertive with what you're doing, but you'd be shocked with what is going on to get these physiques on stage at the
I
start.
mean, we all know people who use a ton of gear and look like shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone knows someone in their gym that is using like way too much, and then their physique just and even their performance just does not replicate, the amount of things
Yeah,
they're putting in the system.
Yeah, of
yeah,
course. I think it's just a coping mechanism because again, it's harder to do all the little shit. People don't want to put in the effort to do it, so it's just easier to point the finger and say, well,
yeah,
you fucking ran 4 grams, 3 grams of gear, so you blew up like that. It's like no, it's all the little things that compound up, and that's what makes the significant difference. If it was that easy, I wish it was that easy. I'll fucking run 3 grams right now if I can make that progress the next year. I'll do it. It's not gonna happen, and I don't know why. It's
No,
so hard for people to comprehend it, but I'm sure to get worse. It gets worse as you're going to get more exposure. It's going to get worse and worse.
definitely.
Do you feel
yeah,
more pressure now?
Uh, I mean, that's something that we talked about like earlier on in the prep, and I've come to manage it very well. Like I've always had, even when I had a smaller following, like that smaller following still had high expectations of me. So I've never really not competed without some kind of pressure, to deliver. It's just that, I mean, you've known me for years, and I had like a non-existent following while you knew me, and then obviously you've seen it grow, and obviously now you've seen it grow at like a faster rate than it ever has. And I was kind of aware that even if I didn't win, I knew that just the look that because like before we even competed, like Calum was posting, videos of me in my posing in a posing room in my gym, and it's getting 11,000 likes, and I'm 6 weeks out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more and more people seeing my stuff, and I'm like, other pages have started sharing it. Bodybuilders Without Borders quite literally posted something like, "Who's beating this?" So it's other people that were, more and more people are starting to see and build that expectation, and I just had to kind of take a step back, and like we talked about at the start of the podcast, like just focus on the things that I loved from the start anyway, and that manages the pressure a lot. So I know it's there going into the Olympia. I mean, but there's been like 2 posts today comparing me to Chris, and posts comparing me to Urs and Wesley and Ramon. So whether I want it or not, like that expectation and that pressure is there, and it's
yeah,
just something that I'll have to handle, as my career goes on. But then on the other side of it, like if people weren't doing that and they really didn't give a shit, it would mean that I'm not really in a direction that you want to go as a pro athlete.
Yeah. You're getting all eyes on you.
Yeah,
Did you watch that Phil Heath documentary?
yeah, I did watch it.
That shit's crazy.
Yeah, man,
Fucking
it was great.
right from the first show, everybody knew. Everybody knew.
Mm,
They're about to see it with you too. It's gonna be awesome.
yeah.
It's gonna be exciting. But I think we covered a good amount here. You guys got anything you want to plug? Anything you guys want to add on here?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good.
good podcast. It's good to talk.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm excited for you. Everybody be following along. If you guys don't follow Calum, make sure you check him out. Great coach. He's doing great work. Obviously, you guys should already know who Niall is because he's about to be one of the best top athletes in this industry. So if you
He's
don't
just
know,
been on
now
your
you do.
Instagram for the last 3 days.
Yeah, he's been on everybody's explore page. He's that guy.
He said
This is
when
him.
he came off stage, he said, I don't know. I think you went to get a drink with Tina or something, and you text me and you're like, my Instagram feed is just me.
Yeah, I was going through it because I was like, oh, let me just cool off. Like people were coming up to me saying, oh, you smoked the show, and I just wanted to, just cool down. So let me go through Instagram, and it's all just me. Like I posted a story of a screen recording, and every single post I was swiping through was just different pictures and videos of me.
It's like an
It
episode of
was
Black
crazy.
Mirror.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy.
That's
Never
awesome.
experienced anything like that.
Well, all right, guys. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate the time,
Awesome.
and
All good.
everybody, make sure you follow along, and we'll see you on the next episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding.